guys, so as I am reading about the injuries around the hip topic that is taken from a book, Essential of Orthopaedics by the Dr. Jitin Maheswari sir. So they mention about the anatomy around the hip, that they mention a word known as a Calcar Femorale. They say a thin vertical plate of a bone springing from the compact medial wall of the shaft and this extending into the spongy bone of the neck. This is known as a Calcar Femorale. So they just mention around 1 to 2 lines. That's why I go dig deep inside it to know what is it. So I came across that Calcar femorale is one of the vital mechanical structures of a part of a proximal femur, and it is one of a part of a truss system of the femur. So what is a truss? A truss is a highly efficient structural framework that is connected of straight interconnected elements joined at a nodes to form a triangular units. Because as you can see कि जब भी हमको एक हैवी वेट लिफ्टिंग की ज़रूरत होती है, जब भी हम एक बड़े पुल बनाते हैं, जब भी तुमने देखा होगा, तो फिर वो एक पर्टिकुलर पैटर्न में होते हैं, दिस काइंड ऑफ दिस पैटर्न एज यू कैन सी. And because they in this the compressive force and the tensile force equalize in such a way that eventually they become stabilized, and that's why this same things seen in our proximal part of a femur, where we have a compressive forces, tensile forces, primary, secondary, balancing out each others. And one of the part of a truss system of the proximal femur is our calcar femoral. And I found there is a research that is given on that thing, given on the village general's library, and I put a link in the descriptions, and I take some few important points from that to discuss about the importance of the calcar femorale. So these are the important points I extracted from the general. It says calcar femoral is a important component of the internal proximal femur, and the property of its material is similar to those of a diaphyseal cortex in the elderly peoples, making it capable of conducting a load from the trabecular bones of the femoral head to the femoral shaft. Compression trabecules and the calcar femorale above that intertrochanteric bear the major point of the load. Means if you understand, it is one of a part that it extending from the posterior medial aspect to the anterior lateral aspect, and the posterior medial aspect is found to be the point where the maximum compressive force and the tensile and the load is find out. So there is a chance of its breaking and fracturing. That's why a calcar femoral, a rough structure is there which help in transferring this load from this side of the posterior medially to the anterior laterally, so that it means like balancing the force around it. This is the whole concept. And the load is transferred along the posterior, and the medial proximal femur is larger than the transferred across the anterior lateral, whether the calcar femoral is been disrupted or not. मतलब अगर calcar femoral हो या ना हो, posterior medial पर सबसे ज़्यादा लोड पड़ता है, इसलिए calcar femoral के होने की वजह से वो जो लोड है वो हम anterior laterally ट्रांसफ़र करते हैं ताकि वो बैलेंस हो पाए. It plays a special role in the truss system, as we already discussed about the truss system, due to its flexural shapes and the fact its attachment points are from the posterior to the anterior on the inside of the femur. Hold the opinion that the load on the proximal head of the femoral head can distribute to the cortex of the medial aspect of the proximal femur evenly because of this truss system. And before the disruption of the calcar femoral, the load is transferred from the femoral head downward to the femoral compact and cancellous bones which contains the calcar femoral. And after the disruption of this calcar femoral, the load once transferred by the calcar femoral is transferred by the femoral cortex. It means that if due to any trauma or something related to the proximal femur, if the calcar femur is disrupted, The role of the calcar femoral is taken up by the femoral cortex, but it is doing it less efficiently, or that's why the chances of its instability is increases. Having an intact calcar femorale can reduce the load in the posterior and the medial proximal femur and increase the load in the anterior and lateral part. As we have already discussed, it transfer it so that equalize the things. That's why the calcar femorale can prevent the posterior and medial proximal femur from suffering the overload. The calcar femorale is often involved in the proximal femoral fractures. If the calcar femorale is broken by or some adjoining a proximal femoral fracture is there, the fracture can be considered to be unstable. It means if a fracture is involving the calcar femorale, a proximal femur fracture, then it considered to be unstable. Now, to manage such fractures, it is critical to achieve some anatomic reduction and fixations of this calcar femorale. And whenever a surgery is performed on the femoral fractures with the intact calcar femorale, we should place the internal fixator close to the calcar femorale, thus not only making a good use of the foam support from the calcar femorale, but also barely disrupting the stress distribution and load conduction in the proximal femur. It means इसका importance सर्जरी परफॉर्म करते में भी है कि जब भी फेमोरल फ्रैक्चर की आप सर्जरी परफॉर्म कर रहे हो एंड यू हैव एन इंटैक्ट कैलकार फेमोरल, देन जो हम फिक्सेशन करेंगे वी हैव टू अप्लाई द फिक्सेटर्स क्लोज टू इट, so that by doing this we are not disturbing the rotational stability and the other component of the which is helpful for the maintenance of the stability of the bone. And yeah, then we again bring to the general, that is most important. I put the link in below and we read the conclusion of this study. It says when bearing on a normal load, the strain value in the posterior and the medial proximal femur are larger than those of the anterior and lateral. ये बता रहा है कि जो स्ट्रेन क्या होता है, इट इज़ अ चेंज इन लेंथ अपॉन टोटल लेंथ. ये पोस्टीरियर मीडियल पोर्शन ऑफ द प्रॉक्सिमल फीमर ज़्यादा होता है एज कम्पेयर टू द एंटीरियर लेटरल. इसलिए जो कैलकार फेमोरल है कैन बियर दिस कंप्रेशन लोड and affect this load conduction and stress pattern by decreasing this load in the posterior and the medial femur and increasing this load or transferring this load in the anterior and the lateral part of the femur. So that is the importance of the calcar femoral. Hope you understand. And this image I found about it. It is a compact bone extending from the lesser trochanter region to eventually to the greater trochanter and goes inferiorly.